Hello again. This is the second in the series of bite-sized theology talks, and in this session I want to deal with a question. And this question comes from Rachel, who is in France, and she writes, and I quote, "I don't have a question. And I wasn't even sure what theology was until I looked it up this morning. I have been studying the nature of God since my dad died a few years ago." And it was that sentence, "I have been studying the nature of God since my dad died a few years ago," that attracted my attention. And I would like to explore that idea of the nature of God, which is a bit tricky, to say the least. My wife, Brenda, was a teacher of theology in a comprehensive school not far from here. A few years ago, and she taught religious education. And on one occasion, at the beginning of the year, with a new class, just 11, 12-year-old children, she began, as she usually did, by talking about the creation myths of various cultures throughout the world, and of course the creation myths of Judaism, the two stories in the book of Genesis about the creation, and then the other myths like the Tower of Babel or the flood, and the interpretation of these myths and legends. And one small boy, after a few lessons, got a bit impatient. He put up his hand and he said, "Miss, when are we going to do about God? Because I don't believe in him." Well, whatever his beliefs were, he certainly had an image in his mind of God as a person, God as a male person. So that's one image of God that is very common. But a theology student some years ago, a young lady who had studied theology for 3 years at university, was asked by a friend, "After all this study, what have you discovered about God?" To which she replied, "Not very much, except that she is black." Sometimes people's image of God can be quite shocking and quite challenging. Sometimes I think that God is a mathematician. When I think of the wonder of creation and the delicate balance of creation, how we manage in this planet to have mostly throughout the world a climate that we can live in, a planet that's just balanced so delicately so that we don't fall off it, in this intricate thing that we call the solar system. God must be a mathematician or an engineer maybe. But there again, when I listen to a Beethoven symphony, I think God surely must be a musician. God must be a musician. How can he create through man such great inspiring works? Or he might be a poet or an artist. But as my son-in-law would say, Alan, who is a psychotherapist and an expert on dreams, as you might know, would say that this is a projection. All these things are projections of our own consciousness. Jack Spong, who is a retired bishop in America, said on one occasion, if we were horses, our God would be horse-shaped. Now that's an interesting thought. So is God nothing but a projection? Well, for me, there is one passage in St. Matthew's Gospel that really says it all, and I'll read that to you. It begins, when the Son of Man comes. The Son of Man is a sort of metaphor for God. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit in state on his throne with all the nations gathered before him. He will separate men into groups as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he will place the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, you have my Father's blessing. Come, enter and possess the kingdom that has been ready for you since the world was made. For when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you took me into your home. And when I was ill, you came to my help. When in prison, you visited me. And the righteous will reply, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and gave you a drink, a stranger and took you home, or naked and clothed you? When did we see you ill or in prison and come to visit you? And the king will answer, I tell you this, anything you did for one of my brothers here, however humble, you did it for me. So, for St. Matthew, God is to be seen in those who are homeless, who are naked, who are hungry, who are ill. And so, all these wonderful people, these doctors, these nurses, these care assistants, all these people are images of God. And there may be one other thought, which is a thought of St. John, a thought which is included in the marriage service, in which he says, quoting from John, God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. What a better image of the nature of God could we have? Thank you. Thank you for your listening, and please keep sending the questions. God bless you and keep safe. Goodbye.